Welcome to the Gravity Well podcast. Here we break down heavy ideas into small buckets that you can handle. Our mission is simple. Help us work through your dilemmas in conversation and process. Together, we and your community will face your dilemmas and make the world a better place for all. In the spirit of truth, I acknowledge I'm a settler on stolen Blackfoot Treaty 7 territory and Métis Districts 5 and 6. I take reconciliation by seeking the wisdom of elders and individuals who aim to restore water, air, land, life, or community. A healthy living relationship with the earth and each other is our guide. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really thrilled to have members of both Hold My Hand Alberta, as Chantel Sherwood, and both Claire and Heidi from Four Kids Alberta. So I'll let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, but I'll just give a little bit of color about this conversation before I do. So I'm really excited to bring Chantel and I left off in a conversation in episode 13. We were talking about some of the things that could change. A lot of different programs in education, call it private, call it charter, call it religious, whatever it is. We have a number of programs that are strained in many ways. And so I'm hoping from Chantel's perspective, she can offer some of those insights and you too as well, Claire and Heidi. And then from an environmental standpoint, the lack of curriculum that we're seeing in terms of what our kids need to be learning about and the, quite frankly, honesty behind what we're experiencing and what our kids need to be able to express in terms of their experiences in this. So there's a lot of overlap between these things, I find, and I'm just curious where this conversation will go. So let's start with some introductions, please. I see you first on my screen, Heidi, so if you wouldn't mind going first. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heidi. I'm a Treaty 6, and I'm part of Four Kids Alberta. So we are kind of an environmental focus group that really just our core mission is just to try to leave a better world for our children. And so we work on a number of different things. And yeah, I started with Claire.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jenny, for hosting this conversation. And I'm on Treaty 7 in Calgary here. And Heidi and I met a number of years ago now. And I think over our shared concern around climate breakdown, we found the For Our Kids Network, which is a national network, but there was no chapter in Alberta. And so together we founded For Our Kids Alberta, and we're very fortunate to have some really excellent caregivers and parents that have joined us. And so we do have local initiatives, provincial advocacy initiatives, and we also advocate at the federal level. So it's here, it's there, it's everywhere. And we are also huge public education advocates. That's really important as well to our mission, I think, of being able to leave a safe future for our kids. So thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. Before I hand it off to Chantel, I just want to give a little bit of color of how I came to know Claire and Heidi. So Claire and I were in a room that we were expecting to be talking about the energy transition. It was during the election, and we had the opportunity to join a discussion that was as we thought about the climate. And I was very new to the political space. So sitting in that room talking about polling results, I was surprised to not be actually talking about the climate. And I felt alone in that. Everybody else seemed to think the conversation was great. And I across the room, Claire put up her hand and stood up and said, "Why aren't we talking about the climate? Like this is the biggest issue we have going. We have people selling stadiums in other provinces that aren't even able to get a room of 12 people in one room to talk." And I said across the room, "Thank you very much." Like it was needed to be said. And so that's really bonded us together and helped me, appreciate the need to expand all of this in education. Even as a parent, I feel that things are so broken, it feels impossible to do anything about. And so I just want to really say how grateful I am to both your organizations for this. So just a little color for you guys before I hand it to Chantel, or let Chantel introduce herself. Chantel and I met through the Alberta Party while I was running in the election. And I was really impressed by Chantel's message around just getting back to base principles of fairness and making sure that behavior is treated similarly no matter what the background of a child is, and that there is an opportunity if we invest in people early and well and set them up for success, it is a huge benefit to all of us, anyone, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. So I don't know if that did you justice, Chantel, but thank you so much for joining us again, and go ahead and add what I missed.
Hi, that was a touch on it, definitely. I'm Chantel. I'm from Treaty 6 and here in Edmonton. I created Hold My Hand Alberta. I'm one of the co-founders. It initially started when we saw COVID hit and we saw the 26,000 EAs laid off. And we thought, which kids is that going to impact the most? Of course, my own, but I was set up to support my son, but I knew a lot of other people would not be. And we started looking at what that meant and having some connections with certain people in the government. We were like, we need to organize and we need to create something. A few MLAs were like, we would love it if we saw some more parents. And what I noticed was there's a big gap between, there's nothing between parents and educators and specialists. And there was all these groups that are just parents or just educators. So we decided to collaborate more, because what we're finding is there's a huge gap in the in-between, and our kids are really getting dumbed down in this in-between. And there is a lot of ableism in education. There's a lot of ableism in the government. So our kids are literally, like we saw recently with a lot of the things happening to our kids, which we can discuss later, it is showing on how often our kids will get lost in the process, and it doesn't actually hit the media. It doesn't hit anything. And we're losing a huge part of our population that are capable and willing to do so much more than we've given them credit for. So our mission is to make sure that every family knows how to access the supports they need. They know how to communicate with schools, with FSCD, with all of that. They have the tools so that not only can they help themselves, but they can lean back and help the people behind them, because the mission is to continue this, not just have myself and the people running Hold My Hand to do everything. So we're just trying to educate as we go.
Right. Teach a person to fish, right?
Exactly, because we can't do this forever.
Yeah, that's amazing. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Okay. So why don't we start into this first question? So it's really just what are some of the things that you can say are going wrong? So I know if you wouldn't mind just expanding on anything you missed in that, Chantel, from your point of view. I heard obviously that there's support that has been dwindling in recent years. What other ways? What things are going wrong? let's do the shed in the first round, and then. Yeah.
It's Alberta. We've just laid off a bunch of FSCD caseworkers, which increases the caseload, which means that families and children will now be waiting.
Can you say what that acronym is again? I'm sorry to interrupt.
So Family Supports of Children with Disabilities. And you can correct me anytime. I sometimes forget which organization I'm talking to when I'm using my acronyms. Family Supports of Children with Disabilities is your FSCD. So that is under Community and Social Services. And what they do is make sure that family has access to things like occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, community aides, respite, psychology, psychiatry, all of those things. Like, this gives us access to tools. In my eyes, we shouldn't need this. I mean, if we're so against private healthcare, we shouldn't need something like this, just in my own opinion, because an occupational therapist to me seems kind of like a no-brainer. Like, wouldn't we just support the child? Wouldn't we just do that? AHS offers it, but you have to qualify in such a strange way. And there's only 2 facilities here in Edmonton. It's really hard to get to. If you are new to Alberta, new to Canada, you are not going to know how to access any of this. It would just be so much easier not to make people apply for it, to speed it up really quick, because I'm trying to condense everything. What we've seen in a letter recently to some of our families is that they will be given an opportunity to have a contract. And when you see that and you think about it, you go, an opportunity. It is an opportunity to get their child help. Is it an opportunity to provide a child support? Or it seems such a, maybe it's poorly worded. Maybe they made a mistake, but at the same time, it does seem to be how they view what our kids need. It's an opportunity for them to get the therapy and support they need. So what they're saying is, if you are of this socioeconomic background, if you are all of these special things, you will know how to do this. So what a great opportunity your child has. It's so gross. Yeah. And it's the same that we're seeing in schools, right? The schools, everything is who you know, what you know. You might not get your kid supports because you didn't say the right things or you said the wrong things and you've upset somebody, and everything depends on your admin. And the reason that is because there is no updated standards for special education. So that's a big key point for me usually, is there's no standard for special education. It hasn't been done since 2003 with an amendment in 2004. So without that, there is nothing to say that this is how it should be. Now, there's a lot of things in schools, like, we speak environmentally, that aren't laid out in schools because it all depends on who your admin is. What if it was straight across the board? It has to be this way. We need
Right.
these that are laid out. One of our big things is we saw seclusion rooms. I was part of the fight to end seclusion rooms and restraints. It's horrific. It's traumatizing. We need to remove that out of schools. No, there's no space for it. We did that. We got it laid out. The NDP said, sure, it's gone. But they actually didn't say how they were going to make it gone. They didn't lay down any footwork for it. They didn't make it a rule. So within like months, the ATA went to the new government, which was the UCP, and went to Adriana LaGrange and said, yeah, we're going to ask you to undo this. So they put
Wow.
back in and reinstated, and Edmonton has some of the highest uses of seclusion rooms in Alberta. So what's
Wow.
going on at EPSB? What's happening where this is a norm? And why are we not moving past it? And why is this okay? Like, we're okay traumatizing children. We're okay touching children. We're okay. Like, there's just so many things. And of course, it comes with lack of EAs, lack of supports, lack of education, ableism, all of those things. But we're not doing anything because there are no rules. And we've seen the dark side of not having rules in place and standards in place, which they would have to follow. So that's really kind of all of the things we're working on in a nutshell.
Thank you. That was incredible. I hope this round is like a shedding of all the awful things. But yes, so yeah, I'm hearing that there's not consistency. It's who you know, it's relationships, it's up to a certain staff. And there's no standard. And that part is actually very consistent, actually, when you think about what's happening from an environmental standpoint, this lack of standardization. It's fascinating. Okay. Claire, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Yeah, that's a lot, Chantel. I think what you've just described is also what I've encountered in the advocacy that I'm doing. So a couple of things that I've noticed is because there is no standard at the province hasn't put in rules around protections in terms of clean air in schools. That's one initiative that I've been working on. We're seeing certain school boards have done some things. Edmonton Public, for example, has put HEPA filters into their classrooms. Medicine Hat School Board has, but Calgary Public has not. And again, it's just this piecemeal approach, and that feeds into inequities in our classrooms. So we know what the best practices are because there's studies out there that show that when you improve ventilation and filtration in classrooms, students do better. They do better from a health perspective. They do better from a learning perspective. So the data is all there. And I, as a parent who sits on my parent council, I wrote a policy that then went to the Alberta School Councils Association, AGM, where the policy was passed. So a majority of parents who represent school councils were in support. Now it goes to the board of ASCA, the Alberta School Councils Association. They've taken it to the Minister of Education, and the Minister of Education has said, no, that's on school boards to do that. So we're back at square one. So it's quite frustrating. And so I hear that in what you're saying, and I've seen that in the work that I'm doing as well. So when, just getting back to the question of what do we need to do, we need to, first of all, stop, I think, underfunding public education. We need to get the supports back in the classroom. The PTs, the OTs, the psychologists, those wraparound services are critical. I really believe that that's so important, so that and that's happening at a young age to catch young people, before these problems and their learning is impacted. Yeah, so those are, I really do want to just say, I'm not an education policy person. That's not my background, but I was a classroom teacher for 10 years. And I know the demands on classroom teachers is really significant. I do believe the majority of classroom teachers are doing their best, but they can't do this alone. And so it really requires, in my view, leadership from the top levels who believe, they tell us they care about our students. They say these nice things, politicians, but if they're not investing in teacher education in public schools, then that I just don't believe them. So, and and that creates conditions for burnout. People don't feel like the work they're doing is valued. There's moral injury because they really feel like they could make a difference, but it's just exhausting, like pushing a boulder uphill. And those good people leave. So,
Yeah.
I think we need to go back to the investments. We need to see it as an investment in our kids' future, not as a drain on society, not a drain on our financial, our finances.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I heard very similar in that there's you know what, Heidi, why don't you go next and I'll try to add some comments afterwards. Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think, of course, like just the underfunding education. So my husband is a teacher and, he's got a classroom of, 25, 30 kids. And it's just like, it is so difficult to keep that many students engaged, regulated, ready to learn. You have varying abilities within the classroom. If trying to keep other people, up to speed, you're losing some of the kids who are grasping things more easily and vice versa. And it's just like so difficult that if like classroom sizes were smaller, if we had more EAs that could help and fill in some of those gaps, like it would just like make such a difference. And I just like think it's so important for kids to like be excited to learn. And if they're struggling or if they're bored, then like they're not going to want to keep going to school. And if kids aren't going to want to go to school, like it's just like I can't imagine children spending their whole lives going to, or grade 1 to 12 going to school and just like being disengaged. Like I think that's just like such a failure on our education system. And you can't do that on like a tight budget. And these kids deserve to be excited to learn. And like the society will benefit so much if we have citizens that are excited to learn. And again, I guess also with the curriculum, like we need a curriculum that is appropriate for students, there's not so much to teach. Like my husband struggled a bit with like fitting in all of these topics that are expected now. Rather than getting in depth, it's just like more about breadth, it seems like, which is really, really tough to keep kids interested when it's just like moving along and we're not really like tackling topics. So I would love to see, a little more work on honing in a curriculum, not making it so political, like this big fight. Like, I don't know why that my father-in-law is an ex-superintendent and he's just like, he can't believe what he's seeing with curriculum right now. He's like, back in my day, it was like the kids came first. All that mattered was teaching them appropriately. It didn't matter which political party was involved. To see it kind of become this like, battleground is just like so disheartening. I feel like I'm all over the place right now.
No, that's great. No, thank you. You brought some of my thoughts back together. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're underfunded, but I'm going to hit on the suggestion that I was saying out of the gates is we have way too many programs going on. There's way too many school types in my view. So again, I'm speaking from a parent. I'm not an educator and I'm curious what you guys think, but I look at, all of these sports programs and specialty programs and everything. And I look at somebody who is, a geoscientist and being honest about the planetary crisis. Do we care about that at this point? Is this really important? Or should we be focusing on helping our kids learn how to be social together and reconnected with our environment? Because, I was talking with one of the groups that recently on this. And, you know, we've been going to an acupuncturist who studies Chinese medicine. And she was saying a lot of times she'll just tell people, you need to be in nature. Like your health issue is related to being disconnected from nature. Like we are that disconnected. And the one thing I was thinking as you guys were talking, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is around parents. So now we're going into what can we do instead? You know, parents used to be much more involved in school, I think, than what they are now. And I'm speaking as somebody, maybe not. Okay. I think there's more becoming awake, maybe. And again, you guys can reflect what you're saying. But I guess my question is, when I look at the lack of support of teachers and this need to create community locally, that's to me one of the opportunities that I see, is to try and reconnect people with our neighbors. And this is part of the problem, is like my kids, we didn't have a school in our neighborhood. So now we're sending them on buses, and we don't have kids in the neighborhood that they have as friends to connect with. So I think there's a big part of that in there, and just how we're separated, not only in curriculum, but even in proximity from where we live and things like that, that I think are impacting. And then of course the curriculum, for it to be political now, is pretty horrifying. Like you said, we should be able to have a nonpartisan group decide on curriculum, and that just be how it prevails. It shouldn't be influenced, which I know this is one of the policies we were trying to move, right, Chantel? So maybe if you wouldn't mind going next, Chantel, what are some of the things that you think of in terms of what we should be doing instead?
I think we have to acknowledge and address that children learn differently. I think, you know, we could talk about the curriculum until we're blue in the face, but we keep designing one curriculum and it does one thing for one type of student. The new curriculum, for instance, I'm pretty opposed to, not going to lie, but the new way of teaching back to phonics and stuff, for my son, he is like loving it. He's dyslexic though. So this for him is pivotal. This change for him means that his focus has been on reading. My son suddenly loves reading. We're going into grade 5, and grade 1 and 2 and 3, he hated it. And grade 4 and 5, he was like, oh my gosh, I can read. What changed? The curriculum changed. Okay. So this worked for him. But what did I read the other day on an ATA page? A bunch of teachers complaining, saying this is the worst change that's ever happened, and that sight words were the best thing ever. And I was like, and they're like, you know, we can't cater to dyslexics. And I was like, that's cruel, because like social studies, math, everything was hard for my son. And now he's finally doing okay. And you don't want to cater to him. So what's the solution then? What's the solution? Okay, we address that kids learn differently. We keep talking about choice in education. I am pro public school 110%. All the way. Most families with children with disabilities don't really get a lot of choice in education. We have public, which won't support our kids, or we can go private if we're wealthy enough, and we could get those options, and maybe our kids will get support, but then they're isolated away from their peers. So what do we do, right? We recognize that these children are better when they're together, that they learn better when they're together, but maybe they're not learning on the same path. And we've talked before about how Finland does their way of educating children. There is a lot of outside play. There is a lot of mixed ways of learning. So if you're at, like, say, a grade 4 level in English, but you're also maybe a grade 2 level in math, you're going to maybe kind of switch things around. And it's not about so much your grade, but it's about your abilities and where you're at, and focusing on improving things as you go, which I think is brilliant. Not saying everything Finland does is perfect. I'm sure it's not. I don't know enough, and I haven't really deep dived to the extent that I've lived the experience. It's not my lived experience. It's just what I'm reading and what I'm seeing and what I watch about it. But we see from like Waldorf schools, we see from Montessori schools. I'm a former Montessori teacher. We see there's different concepts that kids pick up that other kids don't. So are we really meeting every child where they're at by giving one curriculum? Is the solution maybe giving some options? And maybe having certain teachers in one public school, like, you know, we already have 1 or 2 grade 1 classes. We already have 1 or 2 grade 2 classes, and so on. Like, there's not just one grade 1 class. So maybe even splitting that and saying, you know what, our grade 1s that are more tactile learners, they're going to be kind of over here. And we're going to start teaching them where they're at. My youngest is really good in the garden. He loves it. He loves digging in the dirt. He is into the trees. He is up the trees. And this is how we help his ADHD. This is how we soothe him. He needs to go. He needs to run. Both my boys do Irish step dancing. They do it very differently. They're both competitive, but both of them are very different, even in the same style of dance. And they've been teaching my sons to just hone in on what they're good at. One of them is a trick dancer, the other one is a lyrical dancer. Those kind of things alone, just teaching them different styles that work for them has improved them so much and leaps and bounds. And you think about it, if you just look at a child and kind of get to know them and you're like, you don't learn like this. You know, my youngest would work well with sight words. My oldest did not. She learned everything through music. Every child learns differently. And the way we're teaching right now, it's not meeting kids. It's not just about neurodivergence or neurotypical. It is, you know, every kid learning differently, and doing one curriculum is like, here's a size 7 shoe. And if you're a size 7, yay. If you're a size 6.5 or you're a 7.5, okay, you're going to be okay. You're going to be the A, not the A plus, but you're going to be an A student, and then so on. As farther away from that shoe size as you get, the more you're struggling. And then, like Heidi said, these kids no longer enjoy education. I didn't enjoy it. I coasted through because I was like too scared to not do it. But to your point, Jenny, about, you know, whether or not parents are involved, what I'm seeing in the past is that parents were more involved in the teacher, parent, punish role. So if you weren't doing well in your report card, you weren't doing well on things, it's like, how do we get together and punish this child or make this child scared to not do well? Versus what we're seeing now, it's more a collaborative approach. And I really do appreciate a lot of the teachers now who are like, how can I help you get to know your child? And there is more wraparounds and work with a lot of these educators. I've spoken at the ATA a few times. I'm speaking with a lot of new educators coming out of Concordia. They're amazing future educators. They're more concerned about how to get the parent engaged in their child's learning versus how to get them punished for the way their child's learning. So I do see a shift, and I think we're in a good shift there if we continue it going. So that's kind of my take on all of that, is that there's hope. It's just, we have to recognize that not all of these kids can learn with one curriculum. How do you bash a curriculum when it can only work for one size no matter what we do?
Yeah, it's so true. Brilliant. Thank you. Heidi, do you mind going next?
I'm kind of appalled that the ATA or their teachers are against like phonics. Like that kind of blows my mind, because so my oldest is in grade 2 now, and when she was in kindergarten, I was like, how do they teach kids how to read? Like, I just like literally had no idea, and I was like, sight words seems kind of difficult, just straight memorizing words. And so then I kind of like did like a deep dive, and I realized that phonics is the way. It's literally now the science of reading, because there's scientific proof that that is the way people read. They see each letter and they sound it out like in their head. You know, you get quick at it. So yeah, so I'm just confused by that. Like my son is now in kindergarten, and I started the science of reading with him about a year ago, and he can read like small books going into kindergarten. Like, yeah, so I just like, he would have never done that with sight words. But yeah, that's kind of all I want to say then on that. I find that very interesting.
Thank you. Go ahead, Claire. Do you have anything to add there?
Oh my goodness. Chantel, you've given such excellent examples to illustrate, I think, where I'd like to see things go. So one of the things I do want to say is a curriculum is what to teach, how you teach it, and how you bring that to life in the classroom can look so many different ways. So a curriculum is only the piece of paper saying what, but teachers are imaginative, they are creative, they can bring that curriculum to life, as I said, in a multitude of ways. And so that means getting to know their students and figuring out what works for them. So one of the things we're going to start to hear about, I hope, in the next few months in the lead up to COP29 is all about something called, it's UNESCO's Greening Education Partnership. UNESCO has put out 2 frameworks, including guidelines now. The main objective for UNESCO's Greening Education Partnership, and this is happening all over the world, is new tools for greening schools and curricula, highlighting the need to empower young people to play a concrete role in tackling the climate crisis. The focus should be on action-oriented learning. So the 2 frameworks that have been developed, and you can go on the UNESCO World Greening Education website, are that the new greening curriculum guidance is it's a practical manual providing for the first time a common understanding of what climate education should consist of and how countries can mainstream environmental topics across curricula with detailed expected learning outcomes according to age group from 5 years to 18. It focuses on the importance of promoting active learning and designing a range of hands-on activities. This is the ideal curriculum for young people that are not traditional learners, in my opinion. Then we'll get back to this because I have some good examples of already what's happening in Alberta. But then UNESCO's Green School Quality Standard, which has been developed in partnership with other UN agencies, civil society, and countries, sets the minimum requirements on how to create a green school by promoting this action-oriented approach. It recommends that all schools set up green governance committees, including students, teachers, parents, to oversee sustainable management. So this ties in, Jenny, to what you were saying about parents are a key part of this. And parents, we don't have to wait for the UCP. In fact, I'm tired of waiting for the UCP. So we as parents can approach our schools, maybe through the school council, but maybe just through a conversation with principals and assistant principals to say, you know what, I'm really concerned about this. I would love to see a Green Action Committee at this school. And this ties in with what Edmonton Public and Calgary Public are already doing. Edmonton Public has a very comprehensive environmental policy. They're reducing emissions. They have a dashboard that you can follow. Calgary Public has what they call a sustainability framework 2030. I don't see a lot of proactive messaging on social media or in their communications around this. But even in that framework that they've outlined, they want to set up these committees. So every school should have one. They have targets for 2030. And it is a way for parents to get involved and to help teachers and students. And I also want to just say that this shouldn't be an add-on. This should not be an add-on for teachers because they already have too much going on. This is a greening of the current curriculum. So if there is, for example, a mental health strategy in a school, why are there not climate cafes where young people can get together and talk about their emotions around the climate crisis? And in talking about those feelings and being able to share them with other students and their teachers who hopefully validate their concerns, they can come up with ideas on how to act. So that's just one example, right? That's one example. You could integrate climate into shop class. There are schools in Calgary right now that are giving students the opportunity to convert internal combustion engine cars into electric vehicles. Why is that not happening at every high school in the province? So there's really cool things happening in these pockets. What I would like to see is for this to be scaled up. And right now, from my perspective, it's a few of us pushing for this from the bottom up, and we'll keep pushing. But ultimately, wouldn't it be great if we had leaders actually leading? So just a couple more examples I want to give. This greening education, the school boards have a lot that they could be doing. They could be implementing the transition to electric school buses in their school boards. Clean air in schools, again, looking at all electric HVAC systems for health and for learning. If there's solar going up on schools, are they educating students about solar? So this school in rural Alberta called New Miranum School, one of the teachers has been so hands-on with students. They've built a wind turbine and a hydroponic system. They've taken an old bus and created a tiny home. And for the last, I think as in 2023, they now have solar in their community. This is started in one school with a teacher who's passionate, who knows where the world is heading, and has included his students to make the changes that they want to see in their community. So they're heading towards a net zero. They want to be an example of a net zero community. So this is what can be achieved with passion and those ripple effects. And he has been on a few, there's been articles, podcasts, and I believe if he was here talking with us today, he'd be able to give us examples of kids that were disengaged, who didn't learn in the traditional way, who are thriving in that environment. So I also just want to tie in the amazing work that Heidi's doing in her community, because part of this greening education partnership is about community engagement. And Heidi started what we're calling a bike bus in her community. And so I'm going to hand it over to Heidi again, because she's been a superstar in her community and she can tell us all about the bike bus.
Thanks for bringing it up, Claire, because I was like, oh yeah, I totally forgot. I wanted to talk about the bike bus, which is wild because it is my favorite thing in the whole entire world.
Yes, I've already heard, I know about it. So yeah, please go.
Yes, it's so fun. So we did our first one in the spring on Earth Day, and it was cold, and we had 6 other kids aside from our own family. But it's growing, and then we started doing it every single Friday. On our last one in June before summer, we had 30 people, and there was members of the community. We had a town councilor come with us, and it's just so much fun. We have music playing, and the kids are so pumped. And the kids that come once come every time after. They love it, and it just makes me so happy. It sets me up for the weekend, and I can't encourage it enough, because it's the most wholesome, joyful thing I've ever been a part of. And just what a cool way to take a little bit of climate action, just bringing happiness to it. It's been a really good experience for me.
Incredible. So what I love about this is this action-oriented stuff, Claire. I mean, to me, that's the switch that is flipped here. We're no longer building on what we knew and trying to adapt it. It's time to take action, right? It's time to actually, as parents, decide what our future looks like. So, I hear these stories about this teacher in rural Alberta doing that. And I wonder, so we're in the section of how do we work together to support this work and get it duplicative? And because that's really what I'm picturing now is we have a Rubik's Cube. So that's our system. We have this messed up Rubik's Cube. You can't make any sense of it. And every one of these little actions brings that Rubik's Cube into the right orientation. And at some point, the pattern is going to be crystal clear, right? And that's not far off. I think it's just so messed up right now that we can't see that. But I look at these little initiatives. If we figure out what is a template of what he did in that school, right? And help people understand this is a template of how you want to build out your program like they did in that school. And Heidi, for you and your community engagement activity, same thing. What are the nuts and bolts of how you built that? And because to me that's what I'm learning more and more. I'm really excited about this dual screening that we're doing in Calgary next weekend. These 2 movies called Outgrow the System and Water is Love. And they talk all about this future of education, which is tangible, actionable, physical activities towards restoring our environment and learning how to make food locally and all of these re-engagements with the environment. And, Chantel, when you talk about being disengaged in school, I was always the disruptor in school, because what are we doing? Are we not supposed to be having fun? I never understood that. Right. And so I think there's all these, challenges that our kids are experiencing. And I think a lot of it has to do with what they are, the size 7 shoe being shoved down their throats, if you will. Bad way of putting it, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. If you guys can go, maybe, I don't know who wants to go next. Maybe I'll leave it up to you in terms of how can we support each other to make these things, make these changes.
I can go because this all made me think of something so funny. Claire, you'd mentioned like just getting these kids outside and doing these things, and you were talking, Heidi, about your bus initiative, and all I could think was back to when I was in school, so like way back in like the 80s and 90s. I'm not that old. That they had clubs when we were little, and we had these really awesome like save the environment clubs. This is such a big deal, and I still remember all these people that would come talk to us about wetlands and all of this. And what I haven't seen over the last few years is any of that. What I do see in schools is we're very focused on the 7 sacred teachings, which is beautiful, but part of that is what we're talking about today. So it seems like if we're going to go beyond just saying these 7 sacred teachings are a goal, we should actually be implementing it. And it's so much more than just, the words, it's our actions. And these kids are curious. I just did a walking field trip with them. We live near the ravine. The school is near our ravine here. So we go outside, and all these kids, yes, they're a technology bunch. So we do still have to reach them on the level. So what they were doing is taking my iPhone and scanning every plant. And we did this for like hours. And these kids were just scanning the plant. What is this? What is this? What does it do? And I'm like, well, some groups believe it heals this. This is used in a tea. This is used, we were talking about rose hips. And they were like, I didn't know roses could do 2 things. And I was like, they can. So they are curious. And again, a lot of them have families that are new to Canada. And this isn't something that their families are focused on right now. They've got bigger problems, and that is okay. But for those who can do these walks, for those of us who can do these things with these kids, they're curious. They're going to use the tools that they know how to use. So one of them was my phone. And if that's what it takes to get them interested, I'm all for it. We're going to get messy and dirty. My hands are red right now because we pulled beets out of the garden, and my son wanted to make blood. Sure, we're going to go make beet blood. It's whatever it takes. And it's whatever is going to get your kid interested in. And I saw these kids getting so excited. They were told to pick 8 items and put them in their little bag. And it was kind of unfortunate that we're using plastic bags for this experiment. But, they were gathering 8 items. And every one of them was like, what do I have in my bag? What is this? What is this? What is this? And you're like, this is phenomenal, but there's 30 of you. And
right.
It's too many, right? For this poor teacher who then has to go back inside. And going back to that idea that a lesson can go too fast, and they're too fast. These kids had all of these things and they had so many questions, but that lesson was done for the day. And the next day was going to be a new science lesson. So all of that curiosity, we piqued them, and we're going to slam them back down because they're not actually going to learn what we just went through and what we just experienced. And we could have gone for days on this with these kids. And I speak as a volunteer in that classroom. I sit back and I watch these teachers scramble, trying to keep 25 to 30 kids busy with kids who are not speaking English yet, kids who are nonverbal and not speaking yet. And there's 1 EA for 5 classrooms. And my son is in there as the brittle diabetic. So yay. But this teacher is up at the front and she's like, just you sit down, you do this, you do this, you do this. And who's learning? How are they possibly learning with that? And so on top of this challenge of teaching something so quickly, because they've got to compress so much information, like Heidi had been saying her husband has had to do, we're forcing so much information into these kids. They're not digesting it, and it's already shortened because the classroom is now so busy that no learning is really going to happen. And it's unfortunate because these are really awesome, bright, curious kids, and I don't want to see their curiosity killed. They're grade 3s. They're at this like peak level of curiosity, and I dread what happens in a couple of years when they no longer want or care to learn this stuff. It's like right they're in Miss Frizzle stage right now. They're so stoked on science.
Right.
But we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And it kills me.
Yeah, I hear you. It's stretching everybody so thin, and nobody's set up for success. Literally nobody. And yet we're meant to not, they're in competition with each other. So I think one thing I would love to do after we've settled on this conversation is come back together around how does this translate for you Chantel, in terms of, because when we're talking about the environment, social justice comes with that, right? It's making sure that children are, like you said, in a space that they can thrive. So I'm just curious, can you hear any of the social justice aspects to a greening of a curriculum that you see overlap yet, or is that something we should come back to?
I see so much. I think because we have such complex learners, sometimes, I know when I reach my son, it's most often when his hands are in the dirt. Our kids are hyper focused. They're best social justice warriors. I'm sorry, but I'm autistic myself. We hyper focus, and we're your worst enemy or your best friend. Right? Because if you've got our interest and you've piqued our interest, we're going to deep dive with you. We're going to go with you. These kids do well in nature. Most of them do well. Even my kiddo that would much prefer to play a video game and do all that, I've learned to connect him with nature. We go for walks after school through the ravine. We do all that and give him time to breathe. And so whatever it looks like for him, we change it. But I do find that they are best when they're outdoors. They are best when they are doing these things. My kids have been to all my rallies. So when we fought for Puff, my kids came. When we fought for masks and we fought for better ventilation in our schools, because most of us have the air purifiers in the schools, but they don't ever plug them in. My kids learn how to build a Corsi box. Like, you can engage them, you have to find a way, but they're super engaged. My kids know what I do. They love what I do. My daughter is now going to be a teacher. She's been on this ride with me for a long time, and she's neurodivergent herself, and now she's going in to be a teacher because of it, because of the things that we see. And she does like the environment, like she is invested in it because, for instance, Jody Calhoun Stonehouse was put in that seat yesterday for water and air and the environment. And my kids are like, woo, and they're just kind of gauging who she is, but they know that that's her thing. So they know that we just put somebody in place that's actually going to look out for water. They learned what happened in Calgary because our relatives are in Calgary, that they just went through this huge water crisis, and there's a water crisis coming, and my kids are learning how to conserve water. Again, it's just teaching them how
it's
at
so
their level, but you can cross it. Like, so many people are like, these kids they can't, they barely know how to do this. You know what? I had an easier time teaching my kids this than I've been in teaching. I've worked in daycares. I've had an easier time teaching neurodivergent kids this stuff because they kind of want something to hold on to. They want a job. They want something to grab onto. And this is a great initiative for them to grab onto and give them a place in the world. So maybe, you're having a bad day and maybe you didn't read your best and maybe you're struggling in math or whatever, but every child can recycle. Every child can build a Corsi box. Every child can be a good citizen. And that's something they don't have to be the best readers at. They don't have to be the best at anything. Every child can do this. And what an amazing thing to kind of level the playing field out. It's one thing that every kid can do. You're not the fastest runner, doesn't matter. You're not the fastest, you're not the best at soccer, doesn't matter. You'll have a role, you'll have a place. And it's like that one little thing. So of course you can Of course, this kind of stuff crosses lines. Of course it does.
Of course. I'm realizing we're close to the hour, and I know you guys wanted to sign off soon. Claire, do you guys have any closing thoughts quickly before you hop out?
Everything Chantel says, I'm just shaking my head. This is so true. One of the frustrations I had during the pandemic was people talking about pandemic learning loss. And I thought, oh my gosh, my kids are learning so much about planetary health. Like, this is real life, real world learning. And so, we talk about these teachable moments. COVID was a years long teachable moment. It is still a teachable moment. Caring for each other, wearing our masks to protect each other. Those are all amazing skills that some children are learning, hopefully. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we elevated that to be a systemic learning at the systemic level? So it's not just Chantel's kids, lucky kids, learning from her. It's all our kids learning those skills. I wanted to touch on what Chantel said about, the clubs back in the 80s and 90s. You'd have these environment clubs and people would come and talk to you. And those things are happening, but there's a few points I'd like to make. One of the professors I follow, her name is Dr. Ellen Field. She is instrumental in climate change education. And she did a great podcast on the Live It Earth. It was a Live It Earth podcast called Climate Education or something like that. And she said what she's finding in the research that's really interesting is it's not the young people that are learning. It's not young people necessarily in their science classes learning about climate change that are inspired to act. It's the young people that are taking art classes where the art teacher is infusing environment into the art projects. Those are the kids that tend to act. Also, the kids that are learning leadership skills, those are the kids that act. So just teaching young people the science of climate change is not the be all and end all. It's those other, the art one really stuck out for me. So Heidi and I were talking about this before the podcast, and we were just talking about how some schools are cutting back on art and music. And those things I think are so important. And again, that's going to reach another pocket of students learning to dance, learning to perform. So that was just one point. Then I'd also like to point out something, and we probably need a whole other hour to talk about this, but in our environmental education, the environmental education programs quite often are left to third-party providers. So there's organizations, I'm not going to name names right now, in Alberta that will provide energy and environment programs to teachers. And they approach this environment and energy through what's called a balanced bias approach. And that approach does not align with the scientific consensus on climate change. And in a couple months, there will be a report on how the fossil fuel industry has infiltrated our classrooms. And this has been going on for decades. This is not new. It's just that because the climate crisis is so extreme now, it is harmful to students to be offering that kind of education. So there will be a lot more on that in the next couple of months, but I did want to mention it because I think it ties back to that first question. What do we need to stop? Well, we need to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
And I would say, when I was a classroom teacher, there were third-party organizations that came into my classroom, and I welcomed them because I just trusted. I was a new teacher. I just trusted that, these are great resources. Somebody has had to vet them, but that's not always the case. And so I don't believe I ever had the environmental groups in, but, and some of their program offerings are probably wonderful, but there are some that I think are quite problematic. So,
yeah, it's absolutely harmful. From someone who can speak from industry, it's the same method happens to us working in the industry. We're told a different story than what's happening in reality. And it's not right for an entire workforce, just as much as it's not right for our kids. I certainly, one live example of that is being told that we only have $60 billion worth of liability in the province. No, we have $260 billion worth of liability. That is a massive lie that we are taught in industry, that we don't know this number, that it's not known. No, there was a study in 2018, a thorough study that was vetted by many experts that say this. And yeah, so I can say from firsthand experience, I was not welcome being somebody who wants to be focused on cleaning up this province and making sure we're looking after. So I did not experience a balanced, biased approach. I don't think it exists. And I think it's really important. Thank you, Claire, for bringing that into this conversation. So I'll lead off with some takeaways for us, and then if you guys wouldn't mind just closing off for me. Yeah, I love that it comes down to basic principles of like being tied to leadership and being tied to creative being. Like I remember learning art and science are actually really quite closely tied. So I think there's a big hint there, Claire, when you suggest that that one is also fading. Something I'm really excited about for us next year is we're going to run a course in the first couple months on the show about behavioral science. And I'm going to be seeking in education groups, various groups, potentially like yourselves, to participate. But it's a 7-week, like it's a book, 7 weeks focused on educators, but all around basic behavioral health, like self regulation primarily. But there was an article I'll share with this from the IISD about how behavioral science is key to climate change adaptation, because we need to know how to behave differently together. As you pointed out, Claire, we're no longer just learning about things as if it's arm's length. We actually have to take action in the things that we're learning. So it's totally different mindset. So I'm really excited to start there. And I had an advocate tell me that when I started running in the election, Chantel. And so it's something that stuck with me. That's just base principles. And I love that you talked about how what actually clicked for me when you were speaking is that this is an opportunity for everyone. When you talk about opportunities in these resources, talk about an opportunity and not even needing those resources potentially for a system that is not serving anyone. So I don't know, that's my creative mind thinking right now, but I do think that's really key, that this is a everyone opportunity and something that there's nobody gets left behind in this effort, which is really fascinating about that's your mission in the work you're doing. So, okay, I'll pass it to maybe you, Chantel, to lead off with closing comments. Thanks.
I don't want to skip Heidi.
You want to go next, Heidi? We can.
Heidi,
She's good.
I had to quickly touch on something Claire said that I thought was so important. She said, the groups that used to come in, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, I remember some of them were like, I think NMAX and stuff. So I do remember that. But I do also remember the Marshland people. And that one really always stuck with me because I was like, save the ducks. I was determined we were going to save the ducks, right? I think everybody's going to find their cause. Remember, Save the Whales was really big for a long time there, and everybody's got their thing, right? It's whatever reaches the kid, but if we give options, that's great. And if we're hitting them in arts, if we're hitting them in science, let's get them. It reminded me of spending, my kiddo was in grade 2 last year, and we had an opportunity to spend a week at the Space and Science Center here in Edmonton. And they had done renovations in the last few years, and what they removed was all of the oil and gas areas. And now it was really based on, wind and solar and all of this. And we're really talking about that. And we're talking about simple machines. And we've moved more to different things where kids felt like they had more control over it versus like this propaganda, I guess, and I come from an oil family. So I'm being like, I've got some views on every angle of it. Like I've seen every side of it. My husband's an electrician, but he does do a lot of work in solar. There's this cross that comes across in Alberta, and we're just kind of in that rough place. But then we also went to Drumheller this summer. And what we saw a huge change was a lot of that oil and gas that went with the dinosaurs for so long had changed. And my kids visited the Atlas mines. And if you know much about coal and all of that, we've seen the change. And I was talking to my kids, and we thought when we switched from coal to natural gas and all of that, we were like innovators. And we were. And we have to remember that, like, that was a huge win. That's great. What's next? And my kids were in that little train car at the Atlas Mines, and we were touring, and I was telling them, like, I lived in Drumheller when I was a child. My dad was one of the people that helped transition people from coal to natural gas. My dad is still in natural gas. And I was like, your grandpa was part of this transition, and it was a really good thing at the time. What's next, though? What's next? And my kids were given that space, like, what is next? And they came up with some like silly things, of course, because they're kids, like maybe caterpillar wheel things and like just lots of randomness, right? Because that's what kids do. But it gets thinking. And that's what I think our kids really need to be doing. And that's what I like about these new science centers. And I wish our schools were kind of following with them, because that's where the science is. And the kids love it, is, this openness to think and to create and to get ideas, because this is our future. We're going to need to hear from them. They're going to come up with some silly ideas now, but they need to be heard, and they need opportunities to come up with these ideas and to test these ideas. And they're learning about, what a hypothesis is and all of the creative steps that go behind it. But I think when it comes to environment, we can do so much more with them if they're given more than like a half day's lesson. But they're such smart. I can't keep going back to it, but they are such smart, creative, curious minds that it's so fun to hang out with them. I don't want to be a teacher for so many reasons. I'm going to leave that to my daughter, and she wants to teach junior high because she's a sadist. But
No
But-
kidding. That's
Oh.
hilarious. Yeah.
as preschoolers with hormones. No, I'm kidding. They're great kids. I actually really enjoy junior high kids as well. But I don't want any more jaded kids. And what I am seeing and what we need to address is the fact that so many kids, once they hit junior high, are getting burnt out. They're jaded. They don't think they have a say. They don't think they have control in what's happening around them. And I want to empower them. If we do anything, it's just empowering this generation. You are great thinkers. You have great minds. You have great capabilities. It's all about what's next. And I want my kids to always think about what's next, even if they're not perfect at everything they do, as long as they can keep thinking about what's next. And the so what? The worst thing that happens is this. So what? What's next? Let's keep going. And these kids, I've seen so many burnt out kids. I've worked with so many of them doing my other work. I would really like to see our province and our educators and everybody on that step of what's next, what's creative, let's try some things, let's get crazy, versus what the UCP is doing, which is like, let's go 20 years back, because that never worked anyways. That's my thoughts on it. What's next?
Love it. That's a beautiful message, Chantel. Okay, Heidi, yes, I'm sorry. I think I did miss you in a loop. So take your time if you have any more to add.
No, it's all good. So I would just love to see our leadership, like our provincial leadership, just like valuing kids as kids, wanting them to be kids and like, I don't know, like not just see them as like future adults. I want them to like and put resources towards that, because it's hard to let kids be kids when, your teachers and your education workers are just like overrun. It's a big reason why I advocated a lot for affordable childcare a few years ago too, just because like I wanted to see like these little kids be like valued, and the people who are caring for them to be valued. And then also like, that's the top-down approach. Bottom up is just like having conversations with people and like not being afraid to like kind of put yourself out there. So I'm in rural Alberta. Putting myself out there as a tree hugger can be a little bit scary sometimes, but like I have never had anything like negative come towards me from that. The only thing that's happened is like I've found community that I otherwise wouldn't have found, because it is kind of scary to talk about it. And like I started the bike bus. Now one of the parents whose daughter's on the bike bus, like we talk about like native plants and water conservation and things like that. Like, and she's just like so thankful that there's like, she's found someone that we wouldn't have found each other on that level. And just like, having those conversations and meeting other people who are concerned about the lack of EAs or funding, but, maybe don't really know where to turn. Well, I'm going to send them to Chantel and Claire, and I'm going to say, these people know what's up. So, just doing kind of the bare minimum of just talking to your neighbors can go a long ways.
I totally agree. I was just saying this to my husband. I've met the best people doing this work. I just feel more and more supported by really positive people that really care about the world, even locally, whatever level. It's such a great feeling to be a part of. Totally. Okay, Claire, thank you.
Yeah, I echo what Chantel and Heidi have said. I think a lot of people are concerned, but they just don't really know what to do. And so I guess one of the things I would say is get to know who your elected leaders are. We have the Minister of Education, Demetrios Nicolaides, And if you're sending a message to the Minister of Education, always CC the shadow minister on the NDP, and that's Amanda Chapman right now. Same thing for health. I often find when I'm sending letters that the issues that I'm advocating for are education and health related. So clean air in schools, that is education and health. So I make sure to address my emails accordingly. Then share your advocacy with others. So lots of people maybe they don't have time to write a letter, but you've taken the time to write a letter. I'm the queen of this. So then I will just send my letter to, my closest 50 to 80 climate friends and hope that they will take my letter and edit it for themselves, or they're always free to just copy and paste. One of the things that an Edmonton School Board trustee told me when I started my climate advocacy work was never underestimate the power of the parent voice. And I always think about those words. And so parents have the power, really, if we speak up in numbers. So that's really important. I think that message, as we're sort of pushing for change, big changes, small changes, speaking out, doing it in a way that is warm, kind, polite, because elected leaders, I think, are taking more and more flack, and I want good people to be able to step up. So I always, just being considerate in our communications is really important. And then I guess the last thing I would say is get involved in your school council, because all across the province, people are getting involved. And I think we need, those of us who really care and are concerned should try and just attend the meetings to start. And then, drop little hints about what changes could be made, and then see where it takes you. So those are my, I guess, tips. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I thank you for saying that, Claire, because I think this is the one thing that I hope that we can share amongst our group. Chantel is, Claire is really, at least I'm in her 50 to 70 people that she reaches out to. And like brilliantly, like she said, it's organized. It's very clear as to how to support it. So if there's anything like that we can do to help communicate your issues, if we can start cross-pollinating those requests, yeah, I think that's a really big way for us to amplify our strength together in numbers. So thank you all. This has just been awesome. And I hope we can do this again. I'm really excited about this UNESCO effort and this curriculum shift. I think, Claire, you and I can talk about what these working groups are going to look like and how we can help maybe shape that into our next conversation as well. I think there's something to start organizing in there, which is the part that I enjoy. So thank you, guys. This has been amazing. I really appreciate it. Anything else before we wrap? Good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah. Bye. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great night.